Welcome to another video. I will be showing you guys what HTTP service is and how you can use it in Roblox. With HTTP service you can sort of access the internet in Roblox Studio, and first I will be explaining what HTTP is. So in the beginning we will have to start all the way with websites and browsers. So first the question is how we load a website into a browser. To load a website into a browser, we need an HTML file. For example, this is a HTML file. And if I open this file, a website will open in the browser. This website isn't on the internet yet, it's just a file on my computer. To get it on the internet, I would need a domain, a server, and the list goes on. So when we type an URL in here, the browser sends an HTTP GET request to this address, and the server sends us the needed HTML files to load the website into the browser. You can imagine it like this. You are a customer in a restaurant, client or browser. Then you ask the waiter for a specific dish, HTTP GET request API website. Then he goes to the kitchen and asks the chef server for the specific dish, and the waiter comes back to you with the dish, HTML files, CSS, JavaScript files. So when you make a HTTP GET request on URL, basically just an address of the server on the internet, the server gives us back information, most of the time HTML files for websites. So you can basically get the source code of any website. What I just did there is the curl function in the command prompt. What it does is it sends an HTTP GET request to the URL you type here. Now the URL doesn't have to necessarily give HTML data back, it can also give other data back. There are services that have URLs that don't give HTML files back, that are used to load a website into a browser, just a reminder, but other data. For example, this link right here doesn't give any HTML files back, but a JSON file. To be exact, JSON data. Because it isn't really a file, a JSON file is a type of file format, like JPEG and PNG are also file formats. And maybe you already noticed that this JSON data shows the current position of the International Space Station. If I use this curl function in the command prompt, it will give me the same data as it shows in the browser. URL like these that give you this type of information are called APIs. API stands for Application Programming Interface. There is a better explanation for APIs, rather than give this type of information. An API allows different programs to communicate with each other and share data. For example, instead of creating your own weather app program that calculates the temperature and all of that, you can use an API provided by a weather service to access their data and functions. Or instead of making your own program that calculates the position of the ISS, International Space Station, what we can do, because we don't have any access to the GPS on the station, except for NASA or whoever the company behind the ISS is. So they created an API which people can use to get the current position of the ISS. You may ask, why the flip did I just explain what APIs are and how websites work? Well, what HTTP service in Roblox Studio does, it allows you to send HTTP GET and POST requests and encode and decode JSON data and some other not that important functions. If you thought that you can make a browser inside of Roblox that can Google things and load websites, I must disappoint you. No, you can't. The reason for that is that Roblox Studio does not support the programming language HTML, so you would have to create HTML inside of Roblox with Lua, which is almost impossible. But it isn't the end of the world. HTTP service in Roblox Studio does have a use. Pop quiz! What is the main usage of HTTP service in Roblox Studio? The solution is API, because Roblox Studio supports JSON. Like I said before, with HTTP service you can send HTTP GET/POST requests, encode/decode JSON data and some other functions. Here is a list of functions that you can perform with HTTP service. And now we will finally get to the coding part. Open up Roblox Studio and make a new place. Go to Home and then click on Game Settings. But first you will have to save the game to Roblox. Call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it HTTP Service. Then click on Save. After that, click on Home again and Game Settings, and then you can click on Security. Then you will have to allow HTTP requests or else it won't work. Now you can make a new script in the workspace and open it up. To use the different functions of HTTP service, you have to initialize HTTP service. You can do that by typing game get service and then HTTP service, or you can just make a shortcut by making it into a variable, like for example HTTP service equals to that. And now you can just type HTTP service instead of game get service in parentheses HTTP service. I will make an example now. Let's say you want to get the current position of the ISS. For that, we would have to send an HTTP GET request to the API and then decode the JSON data which the API has sent us. By the way, I forgot to say that an API mostly sends data back in JSON, the file format. Okay, first step, send an HTTP GET request to the URL. For an HTTP GET request, we would have to make a variable first, which will hold the data, which a server will send us back after we make the HTTP GET request. I am going to call it HTTP response. And it is going to equal to the actual HTTP GET request, strangely as it sounds. And to make the HTTP GET request, we would have to type HTTP service so we can access their functions, and then get async. Get async is the function that can perform HTTP GET request. And in the parentheses, type the URL. Create a new variable, which value will be the decoded JSON data. I'm going to call it decoded response. And make it equal to HTTP service, or however you call the shortcut to access their functions, like JSON decode, JSON decode. And the JSON decode function in HTTP service does literally what it says, it decodes JSON data. And in the parentheses, we must put the JSON data that we want to decode, in our case, HTTP response. And now we are basically done. Now you can print the position of the ISS in the output bar by typing print, and in the parentheses you must put whatever you want to print in the output bar, obviously, and in our case the decoded response. Now run the game and you will see the position of the ISS in Roblox. You may have noticed that the position of the ISS is weirdly formatted. Actually, it's not weirdly formatted. If you know what dictionaries are in Roblox Studio, but if you don't know what dictionaries are, I will explain it real quick. Basically, you have a variable, dictionary, and it equals to multiple things, as you can see here. And when you want to print the value of the variable, then you have to specify which thing you want to print. It's like in the File Explorer. You have different folders and then you must specify which folder you want to open. And in this case, that we have right here, it is the same thing. Let's say I only want to print the latitude. For that we would have to type print, and then in the parentheses decoded response, and then we have to specify what exactly we want. In our case we want the ISS position, then we just do these brackets, ISS position, and then in the ISS position we have latitude and longitude, I'm not sure. In our case we want the latitude, so we just make another bracket right here and type latitude. And now when we run it we should get the latitude. Yes. There are also other APIs rather than ISS position API. You can find many different APIs on the internet, but if you go deeper and want to use a little bit more complex APIs, you will probably have to use headers. When making an HTTP GET request, you have the option to add headers. Headers allow you to give additional information to the server when performing an HTTP GET request. I will show you why you sometimes must use headers in a bit. There is a popular service called Rapid API which offers many APIs. Now type rapidapi.com in your browser and now you will be redirected to their website, and here you can search for many APIs. For example, I want an API that can give me a random quote, so I just search for quotes. Now I can see here many APIs. for example this one. Now when I click on it, it will redirect to this quotes thing, and now when it loads you can see all of the information that you need. What this API does, it gives a random code like it says in the description, and here it isn't so simple anymore. It's not like you have a URL which you must send an HTTP GET request to, you also must include header. You will know if you must use headers if it says on the website that you found the API on. In this case it's right here, header parameters. It says we must include these parameters because right here it says required, so basically we must include the parameters X rapid API key and X rapid API host, and it already shows you what the value of these header parameters should be. And you maybe already noticed that in the X rapid API key it doesn't show you any text. This is because you don't have an account on Rapid API. So once you made an account you should see a code here. The reason for that is so that there aren't going to be like 1000 bots all spamming the API to make it lag or something like that. So because of that they added the security feature where you need an account to get this code and to verify yourself. If you don't want to make an account, it is not going to work, but because I'm nice, I'm not going to blur out my own Rapid API key so you can use mine, and it's right here, this long code right here. And the next header parameter is X Rapid API host. I'm not sure what it does and why you have to include it, but it says required, so you have to include it, and so it doesn't really matter. And the value for that should be quotes15.p.rapidapi.com. And the way you format headers are like a dictionary, and we already took a look at that, so it's going to be a little bit easier. And let's get started. So just make a variable called headers and make it equal to these weird brackets right here. Press enter and then we can basically begin typing. Now we have to make it like a dictionary, so just make these brackets, these square brackets, and then type the first parameter that we need. In our case, X Rapid API key, and like I said, you need an account for that to get the key right here. And now you just make it equal to this key. If it's too long, I can just copy it from here. Now make it a string, and now you can just make a comma, press enter, and then you can make a second parameter. In our case, it's the X Rapid API host. Now just copy that and make these square brackets again, and type X Rapid API host and make it equal to this value right here, in our case quotes 15.p.rapidapi.com, and do the same thing again. Now if there's a third parameter, just make a comma again and just make these square brackets and just put the value that it has to be. And now we have formatted our headers, and if it's the last one you don't have to make a comma. Now that we have done the headers, we can make another example with this quotes API, so let's get started. Now get a sync, just in these parentheses, make the URL or type the URL. In our case it's the HTTPS blah 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 blah. Just copy that and put it in here. For some reason it doesn't stand here anywhere, but it's okay because it shows right here. And now you can just make a comma, no cache is not that important, you can just set it to false. And then the headers, just type headers or however you called your variable right here. Like I said, headers just give additional information to the server. In our case we have to verify that we have an account, and for some reason this, I don't know what this does, but it exists, so let's just include it. So I also found out that you can have optional parameters right here, and it's basically just the language of the code that you could return. So basically you can set it to any language, English, Espanol, Italian, French, I don't know, for example French. And now as you can see here it says params, a language called French. And now the thing is that Roblox doesn't support it like this, but most of the time optional parameters are set in the URL. Now right here it isn't set in the URL but in this thing right here, so just go to another programming language. I recommend Python, because here you can see the option parameter is set in the URL. Now it's most of the time in the URL, and yeah, now let's just try this. And now when we run it, oh, I'm already running it. Let's just try it again. Now output, and now you can see it's in French and that's a long text. Now the whole time I've only been talking about GET requests, but there are also POST requests. As you can see here, POST, translate POST. And now I will explain when you have to use POST and when you have to use GET and what the difference is. So in the HTTP GET request, the parameters are mostly in the URL, like I showed you with the language code. It was also in the URL, and in POST requests it is in the body. The parameters are in the body, and I will show you soon what a body is. And GET requests are used for fetching documents, like getting the position of the ISS and so on. And POST is mostly for updating data on the server or something. Now, the problem with HTTP GET request is that you have a maximum URL length. Because most of the parameters are inside of the URL, there's a limit to how many parameters you can put in a URL. While in a POST request there is no maximum length, so you can just have a lot of parameters. Now in a HTTP GET request it is okay to cache, that's not so important. In a POST request it's not. And the GET request shouldn't change the server, it just fetches data, while in the POST request it changes the data on the server. So I found this text translator on Rapid API, and basically what it does, it translates text that you give it, and let's get started. So this API requires you to make a POST request to translate stuff. And now the headers are xRapid API key and xRapid API host. I've already done that, and now comes the interesting part, and that's the request body. The request body is just the data that you send to the server. In our case, the source language, target language, and the text that you want to translate. So just make a new variable, the data, and make this, forgot the equal, make these brackets, and then let's begin. Source language, just copy that, make these weird brackets, and then source language. And it is going to equal what language the text that you want to translate is. In our case it's English, so just type EN, a shortcut for English, and then make a comma, and the next thing, target language. In what language do we want to translate our text? Let's say into Spanish, so Español, I think, ES. I'm not sure honestly, but let's just make it ES. Now the third thing is text, like the text that we want to translate. So just make text, and it's going to equal to your text. What is your name? Now we have the data. Before we continue, I want to go through the 5 parameters in a HTTP POST request once again. The first parameter is the URL, then we have the data, the additional data that we send to the server. The third parameter is the content type, after that compress, and the last one, the headers. The content type is important when you make an HTTP POST request. There are different types of content types: application URL encoded, text XML, text plain, application XML, and application JSON. In our case it's application URL encoded, because it shows right here. The thing is that data which was sent to the server in the POST request has to be formatted in a specific format, and the name of the content type already says how you must format the data. In application JSON you have to encode the data in JSON. In application URL encoded you have to URL encode it. Text plain is plain text. Because our content type is application URL encoded, we have to URL encode our data. This is how our data would look like if it was URL encoded. Maybe you can already notice a specific pattern. It's the name of the variable, then an equal, and it equals to our value. After that, if we have a second variable, it just makes this AND thing, and you probably also noticed the %20. %20 stands for spacebar, basically just space. But when you URL encode text and it has a special character like a space or an exclamation mark, it has to be replaced with a percentage and then a specific number. Here is a list. Now, we could encode our data manually by using this pattern, but if we have lots of data that we want to encode, it's going to be a problem. Because of this, we have to use a function that can do that for us. And it would look like this. Don't worry, I will explain how it works. If you have some knowledge of the string library, it could help you understand it better. First, we have a new variable, which will hold the URL encoded data. Then we have the for k v in pairs data to, and what it does is it goes for every item in our dictionary. The k stands for the item, variable name, and the v stands for the value of that variable. After that, we have data equals data dot dot. What this does, it hangs the text that we have after the two dots to the end of the data variable. As you can see here, we have this weird text, and the and symbol, the percentage symbol, s equals percentage symbol and s again. The percentage symbol s is actually just a placeholder for the upcoming function, and it's the format function. And the format function takes two parameters because we have two placeholders right here, and they will be replaced with the URL encoded name of the variable and the URL encoded value of it. In the end, after we have gone through each parameter in the dictionary, we remove the first character of our product because we don't want an and symbol in the beginning of our text. In our case, the function would work like this, and target language equals to ES, and then when we go through the second parameter, and that's the source language, I think, then we just do the same thing with the placeholder. The placeholder gets replaced with the source language, and then it equals to this placeholder, and then it gets replaced with the source language. In our case, it's English. Then once we have gone through the cycle, we have to remove the first and, because then the pattern will be like this: target language equals to ES, then and symbol for the second parameter equals to EN, and then and symbol. And in the beginning we don't need an and symbol. I probably got you confused with the URL encoding function, but don't worry, it won't be always URL encoding. Sometimes you have to encode it in JSON or just plain text, and if it would be JSON, you just type HTTPService to access their functions like JSON encode and then your data. Now in our case it's URL encode, so we use this function to URL encode our data. Now let's get to the post request. The post async takes 5 parameters, and the first one is the URL. So just go to Rapid API and take this URL right here and put it in here. Now the second parameter is the data. Now we have the data right here, but it isn't URL encoded, so we have to take this data because this is the data that will be URL encoded right here. So take this data. Now we have the content type. In our case it's URL encoded, so just type enum http content type dot and then your content type. In our case it's application URL encoded, and most of the time it will be application URL encoded. Now the fourth parameter is compress. You can set it to false, but if you have problems, try setting it to true. And the fifth parameter is the headers. In our case it's this here, right here, so just type headers. Headers, yes. Now we have to print our response, just print. Then we have to decode our HTTP response because it is in JSON and we have to decode it first. So just type HTTPService JSON decode, not encode, decode, and then in here HTTP response. Now we tried out and we should get the decoded response. Sorry for interrupting, but I forgot to say, on Rapid API there are different APIs, and some of them are free and some of them are paid, and in this case it's premium. And the thing is, in Rapid APIs that are freemium, you have to go to pricing, and then there will be a button, basic, $0 a month. Just click on the button. I'm not sure what it says, and after you click it, everything should work. And indeed, data, translate the text, vivo en el planeta Tierra. Thank you guys for watching. This is my tutorial about HTTP service, and if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I will probably answer them. And for the people who came to the end, I want to tell you that our original channel is actually Gabriel and Daniel Games, but it got banned because of impersonating Mr. Beast. Yes, so basically we made a new account and we will post new content here. Have a great day.